This is Land of Havilah, Judges 19. It's the beginning of a new narrative, a 3-chapter section on the moral degeneration of an entire tribe, the tribe of Benjamin. It's a dark and ugly history which instructs us by negative example. It shows us what we don't want to become. Verse 1. In those days when there was no king in Israel, there was no king in Israel, which would have worked fine if the people were keeping Yahweh as king, Deuteronomy 28, 1 through 14. But since the people are not keeping Yahweh as king, the following happened, still in verse 1. There was a certain Levite living on the farther side of the hill country of Ephraim who took to himself a concubine out of Bethlehem, Judah. This certain Levite lived on the far side of Ephraim in relation to Bethlehem, roughly 30 miles from Bethlehem. Verse 2. His concubine played the prostitute against him and went away from him to her father's house to Bethlehem, Judah, and was there for 4 months. The translation is difficult here. Either the concubine committed adultery against the Levite or she simply got angry with him. Whatever the case, she left and went home about 30 miles to her father in Bethlehem. After 4 months, verse 3, her husband arose and went after her to speak kindly to her, to bring her again, having his servant with him and a couple of donkeys. She brought him into her father's house. She brought him into her father's house, meaning they made up. Still in verse 3. And when the father of the young lady saw him, he rejoiced to meet him. His father-in-law, the young lady's father, kept him there, and he stayed with him 3 days. So they ate and drank and stayed there. On the 4th day they got up early in the morning, and he rose to depart. The young lady's father said to his son-in-law, strengthen your heart with a morsel of bread, and afterward you shall go your way. It's early in the morning, and it's a 30-mile trip. He can't make it in one day unless he leaves right now. Verse 6. So they sat down, ate, and drank, both of them together. Then the young lady's father said to the man, please be pleased to stay all night, and let your heart be merry. The man rose up to depart, but his father-in-law urged him, and he stayed there again. He arose early in the morning on the 5th day to depart, and the young lady's father said, please strengthen your heart and stay until the day declines. And they both ate. The father-in-law is getting him to stay the morning and leave in the afternoon. Being that it's hard to go 30 miles in one day, even if you get an early start, he might as well leave around noon, find some place along the way to spend the night, and go the rest of the way the next day. Verse 9. When the young man rose to depart, he and his concubine and his servant, his father-in-law, the young lady's father, said to him, behold, now the day draws toward evening. Please stay all night. Behold, the day is ending. Stay here that your heart may be merry, and tomorrow go on your way early, that you may go home. But the man wouldn't stay that night, but he rose up and departed, and toward Jebus, also called Jerusalem. He's getting a late start. He's passing by Jerusalem, which is only 5 miles into the trip. Still in verse 10. With him were a couple of saddled donkeys. His concubine also was with him. It's him, his concubine, his servant, and 2 donkeys. Verse 11. When they were by Jebus, the day was far spent, and the servant said to his master, please come and let's enter into this city of the Jebusites and stay in it. His master said to him, we won't enter into the city of a foreigner that is not of the children of Israel, but we will pass over to Gibeah. Jerusalem was called Jebus at that time. In the day of Joshua, Israel was not able to drive the local Jebusites out of Jebus, so it's not an Israelite town. Even though it's late, the Levite wants to go on to Gibeah because it's got Israelites in it rather than Jebusites. The ironic thing here is that the Levite would have been better off spending the night in this town of foreigners than he's going to be in the Israelite town of Gibeah. The Gibeonites are supposed to be the people of God, but they're going to act with greater evil than the Jebusites would have. Verse 13. He said to his servant, come and let's draw near to one of these places, and we will lodge in Gibeah or in Ramah. So they passed on and went their way. And the sun went down on them near Gibeah, which belongs to Benjamin. We don't know the exact location of ancient Gibeah, but it must be barely north of Jerusalem, definitely within the tribal land of Benjamin. Joshua 18:28. Verse 15. They went over there to go in to stay in Gibeah. He went in and sat down in the street of the city, for there was no one who took them into his house to stay. None of the Benjamites took them in, so they're going to sleep in the street. Verse 16. Behold, an old man came from his work out of the field at evening. Now the man was from the hill country of Ephraim, and he lived in Gibeah, but the men of the place were Benjamites. Comment, the old man's an Ephraimite who happens to be living in Gibeah of the Benjamites. Verse 17. He lifted up his eyes and saw the wayfaring man in the street of the city, and the old man said, Where are you going? Where did you come from? He said to him, We are passing from Bethlehem, Judah, to the farther side of the hill country of Ephraim. I am from there, and I went to Bethlehem, Judah. I am going to Yahweh's house, and there is no one who has taken me into his house. Comment, he says he's going to Yahweh's house, which is in Shiloh in northern Ephraim near his home. This is just a convenient way of telling the old man approximately where he's going. Verse 19. Yet there is both straw and feed for our donkeys, and there is bread and wine also for me and for your servant, and for the young man who is with your servants. There is no lack of anything. Comment, the Levite says, I have all my own supplies. All I need is a roof over my head. Verse 20. The old man said, Peace be to you. However, let me supply all your needs. Just don't sleep in the street. So he brought him into his house and gave the donkeys fodder. Then they washed their feet and ate and drank. As they were making their hearts merry, behold, the men of the city, certain wicked fellows, surrounded the house, beating at the door. And they spoke to the master of the house, the old man, saying, Bring out the man who came into your house, that we can have sex with him. Comment, the next chapter gives a little more information about this. The Levite said the Baals of Gibeah attacked him. Baal means Lord, or in this case, the leading men of the city attacked him. There's no one in town, in other words, that's going to put a stop to this because the leading men are involved. This is very similar to the incident at Sodom, Genesis 19:4, when men surrounded the house and demanded to have sex with the two strangers inside. So Benjamin has sunk as low as Sodom. Verse 22 calls them wicked fellows, which has often been translated worthless or good for nothing. Jesus said the axe is already laid at the root of the trees. Therefore, every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. End quote. In other words, every worthless man will be thrown into the fire, and the plan is already in full swing. Verse 23. The man, the master of the house, went out to them and said to them, No, my brothers, please don't act so wickedly, since this man has come into my house. Don't do this folly. Behold, here is my virgin daughter and his concubine. I will bring them out now. Humble them and do with them what seems good to you, but to this man don't do any such folly. Comment, the old man is trying to protect the Levite by offering his virgin daughter and the Levite's concubine. Verse 25. But the men wouldn't listen to him, so the man laid hold of his concubine. Comment, the Levite laid hold of his concubine, still in verse 25, and brought her out to them. Comment, the Levite was in a tight spot and chose the wrong course of action by sending out his concubine. He should have prayed to Yahweh for intervention or even died fighting rather than betray anyone. Ephesians 5:25, quote, Husbands, love your wives just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself up for her, end quote. But he sent her out, and verse 26, and they had sex with her and abused her all night until the morning. When the day began to dawn, they let her go. Then the woman came in the dawning of the day and fell down at the door of the man's house where her Lord was until it was light. Comment, she made it back to the old man's doorstep and collapsed. Verse 25. Her Lord rose up in the morning. Comment, the Levite got up early, still in verse 27, and opened the doors of the house and went out to go his way, and behold, the woman, his concubine, had fallen down at the door of the house with her hands on the threshold. He said to her, Get up and let's get going. But no one answered. Comment, she's dead, still in verse 28. Then he took her up on the donkey, and the man rose up and went to his place. When he had come into his house, he took a knife and cut up his concubine and divided her limb by limb into 12 pieces and sent her throughout all the borders of Israel. Comment, he cut her up in 12 pieces, probably one for each of the tribes of Israel. In other words, he's putting all of Israel on notice. Verse 30. It was so that all who saw it said, Such a deed has not been done or seen from the day that the children of Israel came up out of the land of Egypt to this day. Consider it, take counsel, and speak. Comment, in other words, they looked at each other and said, We have to do something. If we feel unsettled after a history like this, that's good. We should feel as unsettled as the men of Israel. There's no end to the evil that comes from rejecting Yahweh unless we put a stop to it. That's the chapter. Will the men of Israel be apathetic, or are they going to get up and do something? Will we oppose the evil in our land, or will we be tolerant of it? We should be as concerned as we would be if the body parts were delivered to our own doorstep. With regard to the evil in our land, let's consider it, take counsel, and speak. Judges 20 is next at landofhavilah.net. Judges 20. This is the map of Judges 19. The Levite lived in northern Ephraim, somewhere in the vicinity of Shiloh. The Dead Sea is 10 miles across at the widest point for reference. His concubine was from Bethlehem. They left Bethlehem, passed by Jerusalem, which was a mistake in retrospect, and came to the Benjamite town of Gibeah, somewhere just past Jerusalem. He went on home to northern Ephraim and sent the body parts throughout the borders of all Israel.